Do not try to stand. The Alpha King's voice cut through the moon gathering just as Claire Bennett's hand slipped from the edge of the banquet table. One moment, she had been carrying a tray of herbal tea toward the elders seated near the back of Willow Creek Hall. The next, her right leg refused to support her. Pain tightened around her ankle, sharp enough to steal her breath. Claire lowered herself toward the stone floor before the tray could fall, but the sudden movement sent a wave of panic through her chest. "It hurts," she whispered, gripping the tablecloth. Then louder, because her body would not obey her. "I cannot move." The music stopped. Conversations disappeared. Nearly 100 faces turned toward her at once. Claire hated that more than the pain. She had spent years learning how to move quietly through crowded rooms, helping without becoming the center of anything. Now every eye in Willow Creek seemed fixed on the Omega sitting on the floor during the most important royal gathering of the season. Jason Cole stepped forward immediately. "I will get 2 guards to help her outside. Nobody touches her." The words were calm, not loud, yet the entire hall froze. Alpha King Alexander Hayes rose from the raised dais at the front of the room. At 40, he carried the kind of authority that seemed to change the air before he even moved. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark formal coat marked with the royal crest, he crossed the hall without hurry. Claire wished the floor would open beneath her. "Your Majesty, I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to interrupt the ceremony." Alexander stopped several feet away. His expression changed. Not irritation. Something closer to disbelief. "You are apologizing?" Claire swallowed. Everyone was waiting. He looked around the silent hall, then back at her. "They can continue waiting." Before anyone could react, the Alpha King lowered himself to one knee on the stone floor. A soft gasp moved through the room. Claire stared at him. Kings did not kneel at moon gatherings. Certainly not in front of Omegas carrying tea. Alexander seemed completely unaware that he had just unsettled every social rule in the hall. "Can you feel your foot?" he asked. Claire nodded quickly. "Yes." "Your toes?" She moved them carefully inside her shoe. "Yes." The tension in his jaw eased by a fraction. Martha Reed hurried forward with her healer bag, and Alexander shifted aside enough to give her room without moving away from Claire. "Where does it hurt?" Martha asked. Claire pointed toward the outside of her ankle. "It started this morning. I thought it would stop." Alexander looked at her. "You have been walking on it all day?" Claire hesitated. That was answer enough. While Martha examined the ankle, Alexander's gaze dropped briefly to Claire's hands. A worn blue ribbon was tied around her wrist, faded almost gray with age. Tiny silver thread crossed one corner in a pattern so old that most people would never notice it. Alexander did. For the first time since he entered the hall, the Alpha King went completely still. Martha Reed examined Claire's ankle with careful hands while the rest of Willow Creek Hall remained so quiet that the crackle of the fireplace sounded loud. "Nothing feels broken," the healer said at last. Claire released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Then I can stand." "No," Martha and Alexander said at the same time. Claire looked between them. Daniel Brooks, standing several feet behind the king, covered a smile with his hand. "An impressive alliance," he murmured. Alexander ignored him. Martha continued checking the swelling near Claire's ankle. "You strained it, probably when you slipped earlier, and then you spent the entire day walking on it." Claire glanced away. Alexander noticed. "You slipped earlier?" "On the back steps this morning." "And you told no one." Claire tried to make the explanation sound reasonable. There was work to do. Alexander's expression did not harden. Somehow, that made her more aware of how foolish the words sounded. "Of course there was," he said quietly. Martha opened her bag and reached for a folded cloth. Before she could place it beneath Claire's foot, Alexander removed the dark royal cloak from his shoulders. He folded the heavy fabric twice and set it carefully beneath Claire's ankle. A visible ripple moved through the gathered pack. Claire stared at the embroidered silver crest now resting on the floor beneath her shoe. "Your Majesty, you cannot use that." Alexander looked at her. "Why not?" "Because it is your royal cloak. At the moment, it is a cushion." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Very versatile government property." A few nervous laughs moved through the room, breaking the tension. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Then Martha gently adjusted her foot, and Claire winced. Alexander's attention returned to her immediately. "How long have you been hurting?" "Since this morning." "That was not my question." Claire hesitated. The hall felt smaller suddenly. It became worse after lunch. Alexander looked toward the abandoned tray of herbal tea several yards away. And you kept working. The elders needed their medicine. The children needed help getting ready. Martha was short two assistants. Everyone needed something, he said. Claire nodded, relieved that he understood. But Alexander's gaze remained on her. And who was supposed to notice what you needed? The question landed harder than she expected. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. Around them, people shifted uncomfortably. Several elders lowered their eyes. Jason Cole, who had spent most of the evening organizing the gathering, looked suddenly guilty. Claire did not want that. No one did anything wrong, she said quickly. I did not ask for help. Alexander's voice softened. That does not mean no one should have looked. Claire felt heat rise behind her eyes and immediately focused on the floor. She refused to cry in front of nearly 100 people over an ankle that would probably heal in a few days. Martha finished wrapping it and gave Claire a firm look. You are resting tonight and tomorrow. Tomorrow, Claire repeated. All of it. Daniel leaned toward Alexander. She looks more frightened by that than by the injury. I heard you, Claire said. Excellent hearing, Daniel replied. This time she did smile. Alexander watched the expression appear, brief but genuine, and something warm crossed his face. Then his gaze drifted once more toward the faded blue ribbon around her wrist. The tiny silver pattern caught the firelight. He knew that stitching. He had not seen it in 18 years. And suddenly the woman sitting before him was no longer simply the quiet Omega everyone depended on. The next morning, Claire woke to the sound of paper moving beside her bed and immediately knew Martha had made a mistake by leaving medical records within reach. Her ankle rested on 2 pillows, wrapped neatly and elevated exactly as ordered. The Healer cottage was quiet except for birds outside the window and the soft crackle of the stove. Claire had already organized 3 patient schedules when the door opened. Alexander Hayes stepped inside carrying a covered breakfast tray. He stopped. His eyes moved from Claire to the papers in her lap, then back to Claire. You were supposed to be resting. Claire straightened slightly. I am resting. Alexander looked at the stack of records. Aggressively, apparently. She tried not to smile. These needed sorting. Did they? Yes. Would the kingdom collapse if they waited until tomorrow? Claire considered it. Probably not. Encouraging. He placed the tray on the small table beside her and reached calmly for the papers. Claire tightened her grip. What are you doing? Preventing a national emergency. Those are patient schedules. Exactly. Dangerous documents. She stared at him. Alexander stared back. Neither moved. Then Daniel Brooks appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee and took in the scene. Should I call the royal guard? Or is the king winning this battle? Claire released the papers with exaggerated reluctance. Alexander handed them to Daniel. Remove these. Daniel accepted the stack solemnly. At once. I will place them somewhere terrifying. Where? Claire asked. A desk. She laughed despite herself. Alexander pulled a chair beside the bed, leaving enough space that she never felt crowded. How does your ankle feel? Better. That answer sounded practiced. It is less sore than last night. He nodded, satisfied with the honesty. Claire glanced toward the breakfast tray. Did you bring that? Martha said you skipped dinner. I was tired. You were also hungry. Claire lifted the cover and found oatmeal, sliced apples, toast, and honey. Nothing elaborate. Somehow that made the gesture feel more personal. Kings usually deliver breakfast? She asked. Only during severe administrative crises, such as unauthorized paperwork? Especially that. Her smile faded gently as she looked toward the cottage window. There are people who need me today. Alexander leaned back in his chair. Who? Mrs. Harper needs her joint tonic. Tommy has a cough. Martha needs help with the afternoon medicine rounds. Jason has the winter supply inventory. Alexander listened patiently until she stopped. You named 4 people. Claire looked at him. Yes. I asked who takes care of you. She blinked. Martha checks on me. That was not really an answer. Daniel brought coffee. From the doorway, Daniel raised his cup. For myself, unfortunately. Claire sighed. I can take care of myself. Alexander's gaze softened. I know you can. The certainty in his voice surprised her. Then why are we having this conversation? Because being capable of carrying everything does not mean you should have to. Claire looked down at her hands. The faded blue ribbon around her wrist rested against her skin, its tiny silver stitching catching the morning light. Alexander noticed it again. This time, His expression changed before he could hide it. Claire followed his gaze. You keep looking at this. He was silent for half a second too long. It is unusual. A child gave it to me years ago. Alexander's fingers went still against the arm of the chair. What child? Claire smiled faintly at the memory. I do not remember his name. He was sick, frightened, and very serious for someone so young. She touched the ribbon carefully. He thought he needed to be brave all the time. Alexander looked at her as if the room had suddenly become much smaller. And what did you tell him? Claire thought for a moment. Then she smiled. I told him he could borrow my courage until he found his own. Alexander said nothing. But somewhere beneath his calm expression, 18 years disappeared. Alexander looked at the faded ribbon around Claire's wrist for so long that she finally raised one eyebrow. You are doing it again. He blinked. Doing what? Looking at this like it owes you money. From the doorway, Daniel nearly spilled his coffee. Alexander gave him a warning glance, but Claire was already smiling. She touched the ribbon with her thumb. It is just an old piece of fabric. No, Alexander said quietly. It is not. The words came too quickly. Claire's smile faded. He leaned forward slightly, careful not to crowd her. May I see the stitching? She hesitated, then held out her wrist. Alexander did not touch her. He simply studied the tiny silver pattern woven into one corner. A crescent shape, 3 narrow lines beneath it, almost invisible after 18 years of wear. His expression became unreadable. That symbol belonged to an older branch of the royal household, he said. Claire looked down. Royal? Before the crest was changed. Then why would a sick child have it? Alexander's gaze lifted to hers. That is a good question. Daniel became suddenly fascinated by the wall. Claire noticed. You both know something. I know many things, Daniel said. Most of them useless. Alexander ignored him. Do you remember where you met the boy? Claire thought for a moment. Here in Willow Creek. During a winter fever season. I was about 10. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And you kept the ribbon all this time? He gave me half after I gave him mine. She smiled faintly. We decided courage worked better if we split it. For the first time, Alexander looked away. Something in that simple answer had reached him more deeply than Claire understood. She wanted to ask why, but Martha entered carrying a fresh wrap for her ankle. No mysteries before breakfast is finished, the healer announced. Claire looked guiltily at the untouched toast. Alexander immediately pointed toward it. You heard the healer. You are enjoying this far too much. Immensely. Martha changed the wrap while Claire ate, and by the time she finished, her attention had shifted from the ribbon to the schedule posted beside the door. Martha, I can help with afternoon rounds from a chair. No. I can organize medicines. No. I can at least check the inventory. Alexander folded his arms. You appear determined to turn resting into a competitive event. Claire sighed. I do not like doing nothing. His expression softened. Resting is not nothing. That is easy for a king to say. Daniel coughed into his cup. It really is not. He schedules meetings during meals. Alexander looked offended. Efficient leadership. Chronic inability to sit still, Daniel corrected. Claire laughed, and even Martha smiled. Alexander surrendered with a small shake of his head. Then he looked back at Claire. Perhaps we are both bad at stopping. The humor faded into something gentler. Claire glanced toward the window, where 2 young pack members were carrying baskets toward the healer wing without her. What if people need me? She asked. Alexander followed her gaze. Then they can learn to need each other for one day. She looked at him. And if something goes wrong, then someone else will solve it. Claire was silent. That possibility seemed almost more frightening than the pain in her ankle. Alexander noticed. You do not have to earn your place here every morning, Claire. Her fingers tightened slightly around the blue ribbon. I know, but her voice said she did not. Alexander heard that too. He said nothing more. He simply sat beside her while Willow Creek continued outside without falling apart. And for the first time in years, Claire had to face a strange question she had always avoided. If she was not helping someone, who was she allowed to be? 2 days later, Claire stood at the edge of the Healer cottage garden with one hand resting lightly on the wooden railing and the other wrapped around a walking stick Martha had insisted she use. Her ankle was improving, but the first step still felt like a negotiation between courage and common sense. Alexander waited several feet ahead of her beneath the pale afternoon sun, dressed more simply than he had been at the moon gathering. No royal cloak, no formal coat, just dark trousers, boots, and a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. "You are staring at the path like it personally offended you," he said. Claire narrowed her eyes. "I am assessing it." "For weaknesses?" "Exactly." Daniel appeared behind them carrying a wooden chair, a folded blanket, a basket of food, and enough supplies for what looked like a 3-day expedition. Claire stared at him. "Are we walking 20 feet or crossing the mountains?" Daniel set the chair down with great dignity. "With His Majesty involved?" "Apparently both." Alexander glanced back. "I asked you to bring one chair. I believe in preparation." Claire laughed, and some of the tightness in her chest eased. Alexander turned back to her and held out one hand. He did not step closer. "Ready?" Claire looked at the distance between them. 20 feet had never seemed so long. "What if I cannot make it?" "Then you stop. And if I need help?" "You ask. And if I am slower than you?" His expression softened. "Your pace, not mine." Something about those 4 words settled her more than any reassurance could have. Claire placed the walking stick carefully, shifted her weight, and took one step. Her ankle protested, but not sharply. Another step followed. Then another. Alexander moved backward at exactly her speed, never pulling her forward, never reaching for her before she asked. Halfway across the garden, Claire paused. "You know, most people would simply tell me I am doing well." "You are doing well." That sounded suspiciously delayed. "I was building suspense." Daniel called from behind them. "His Majesty has recently discovered humor. We are monitoring the condition." Claire laughed again, and the next step came easier. When she finally reached Alexander, she looked down at the small distance she had crossed and felt ridiculously proud of it. 20 feet, she said. "A historic campaign," Daniel announced. Alexander smiled, but his attention stayed on Claire. "How does it feel?" "Better than yesterday." "Your ankle?" She hesitated. He noticed immediately. Claire looked toward the healer wing beyond the garden. For 2 days, other people had handled medicine rounds, meals, schedules, and children. Nothing had collapsed. No one had forgotten her. Strangely, people had begun visiting simply to sit with her. "Everything," she admitted. Alexander's eyes warmed. Claire lowered herself into the chair Daniel had carried and noticed Alexander looking at the blue ribbon around her wrist again. "You still have not explained why this matters to you." Daniel suddenly became fascinated by the food basket. Alexander was quiet for a moment. "I will." Claire studied him. "When—" He glanced toward the faded silver stitching. "When I am certain I remember it correctly." It was not the answer she wanted, but something in his face stopped her from pushing. Instead, she leaned back beneath the afternoon sun while Alexander sat beside her, and Claire realized that for the first time in years, resting beside someone did not feel like wasting time. It felt like being allowed to stay. That evening, Claire sat beneath the covered porch of the Healer cottage with a blanket over her knees and a cup of warm cider between her hands while Willow Creek settled into the blue quiet before night. Her ankle ached only slightly now, but Alexander had still insisted that 20 feet of walking counted as enough victory for one day. Daniel had called that statement deeply suspicious coming from a man who believed 3-hour council meetings were reasonable. Claire smiled at the memory. Across the yard, Alexander stood speaking with Martha near the herb garden. He looked different outside the formal hall. Less like a king carved from stone. More like a man learning how to slow down. When he finally joined her, Claire shifted slightly on the bench to make room. "How many people did you order not to let me work tomorrow?" she asked. Alexander sat beside her. "None." "That answer worries me." Martha volunteered. Claire sighed. Of course she did. For a moment, they listened to crickets beyond the fence. Then Alexander said, "You told me people always needed something from you." Claire looked down at the cider. "They do." That was not criticism. His voice stayed gentle. "I am trying to understand why stopping feels so difficult for you." She had expected another joke. The sincerity caught her off guard. Claire traced one finger around the rim of the cup. "My mother was a healer." Alexander waited. "When I was 10, winter fever moved through Willow Creek. She barely slept for weeks. I followed her everywhere because I thought if I carried enough towels, mixed enough tea, remembered enough names, somehow that would help." Claire paused. The memory had softened with time, but not disappeared. She became sick near the end of the season. Everyone tried to help her. It was not anyone's fault. Alexander said nothing, and she was grateful for that. "Afterward, I think I decided that being useful was the safest thing I could be." If someone needed something, I could do something. If I was doing something, I did not have to feel helpless. Alexander's gaze stayed on the darkening garden. That is a heavy job for a 10-year-old. Claire gave a faint smile. I was very organized. I believe that immediately. She laughed softly. Then the laughter faded. I know it does not make sense anymore. It makes sense. She looked at him. Alexander turned toward her. That does not mean it has to control the rest of your life. Claire swallowed. He continued carefully. Caring for people should not require disappearing from your own life. The words settled into the quiet between them. Claire looked toward the healer wing, where lights glowed warmly through the windows. Someone else was finishing the evening medicine round. Someone else was checking the inventory. And everything was fine. I do not know how to stop feeling guilty, she admitted. Then do not start there. Where do I start? Alexander considered it. 5 minutes. Claire blinked. 5 minutes. 5 minutes where nobody needs anything from you. That sounds unrealistic. I am the Alpha King. I can probably secure 5 minutes. From the garden, Daniel called. I will alert the kingdom. Claire laughed again. Alexander smiled. Then his attention drifted to the blue ribbon around her wrist. That boy you helped during the winter fever, he said. Do you remember anything else about him? Claire thought for a moment. He hated bitter medicine. He pretended he was not scared. And he kept asking when his father would come back. Alexander went very still. Claire noticed. Why? He looked toward the fading light beyond the trees. Because I think I may finally remember exactly who he was. The next morning, Claire walked into the healer wing expecting to find chaos. Instead, she stopped in the doorway. Every medicine shelf had been restocked. The patient board had been updated. 3 names she did not recognize were written beside the afternoon rounds, and a fresh schedule hung where her old one used to be. Claire stared at it. What happened? Martha looked up from the counter. Good morning to you too. Claire pointed at the schedule. Why is Jason covering inventory? Because he volunteered. And Mrs. Harper's tonic? Already delivered. Tommy's cough medicine? His mother picked it up 20 minutes ago. Claire blinked. Who reorganized the supply cabinet? Daniel raised one hand from a chair near the window. I would like the record to show that I was specifically forbidden from participating in that. For good reason, Martha said. Claire moved farther into the room, still using the walking stick, but putting more weight on her ankle than she had 2 days earlier. Someone had even placed a small vase of wildflowers beside her usual workstation. I do not understand. Jason entered carrying a ledger and stopped when he saw her expression. I was going to explain. Please do. He looked almost embarrassed. We changed the work rotation. Claire stared at him. Without me. That was the point. Daniel quietly took a sip of coffee. Claire ignored him. Jason continued. Everyone kept assuming you would handle things because you always did. Medicine rounds, supply checks, helping the elders, covering missed shifts. You never complained, so we stopped noticing how much you were carrying. Claire looked around the room. No one forced me. We know. His voice softened. That does not mean we should have let you do everything. Behind him, 2 young pack members entered with baskets of clean linens. One of them smiled at Claire. Martha says these go in the back room. Claire automatically reached for a basket. Both of them stepped away at the same time. No, they said together. Claire stared at them. Daniel nearly laughed into his cup. You have become a highly regulated resource. Apparently. By noon, the pattern continued. An older woman brought soup. A father Claire had helped during winter fever repaired the loose latch on the healer gate. 3 teenagers volunteered to carry supplies from storage. Nobody acted as though Claire were fragile. They simply showed up. That difference reached her slowly. Alexander arrived just after lunch and found her sitting outside beneath the porch awning, watching Jason attempt to explain inventory labels to Daniel. That looks dangerous, Alexander said. Claire smiled. For the inventory, yes. He sat beside her. How does it feel? She knew he was not asking about her ankle. Claire looked across the yard. Strange. Bad strange. No. She searched for the right word. Unfamiliar. Alexander waited. Claire folded her hands around the faded blue ribbon at her wrist. I thought if I stopped helping, people might realize they did not need me. And instead, she watched Martha laugh with one of the volunteers near the herb garden. They remembered me anyway. Alexander's gaze softened. Claire, everyone here loved you. She looked at him. Then how did no one notice? He was quiet for a moment. Because people can grow used to kindness. Sometimes so used to it that they forget love has to show up too. Claire looked away before he could see how deeply the words landed. A breeze moved through the pines. Somewhere nearby, Daniel announced that he had successfully alphabetized absolutely nothing. Claire laughed. Then Alexander reached into the inside pocket of his coat and touched something he did not remove. His eyes dropped to the blue ribbon on her wrist. "There is something I need to show you tonight," he said. Claire's smile faded into curiosity. "About the boy?" Alexander nodded. "About the ribbon. And about why I remembered your words before you remembered me." That evening, Claire found Alexander waiting beneath the old cedar beside Willow Creek Hall, where lantern lights spilled softly across the stone path, and the first stars appeared above the pines. Her ankle was strong enough now that she needed the walking stick only for longer distances, but Alexander still matched his pace to hers without comment. Daniel had offered to accompany them, then dramatically announced that history was probably safer without witnesses and disappeared toward the dining hall. Claire stopped beside the cedar. "You said you had something to show me." Alexander nodded. For once, the Alpha King looked almost uncertain. He reached inside his coat and removed a small folded piece of blue fabric. Claire forgot to breathe. The ribbon was faded, worn at the edges, and embroidered with the same tiny silver pattern as the one around her wrist. Her fingers rose instinctively to her own ribbon. "That cannot be." Alexander opened his palm. The two pieces were nearly identical. 18 years ago, he said quietly, "my father brought me through Willow Creek during the winter fever outbreak. I was 22, already expected to behave like a future king, and completely convinced that admitting fear would disappoint everyone." Claire stared at him. The age startled her. Her childhood memory had blurred the young man into something smaller, younger, because fear had made him seem vulnerable. Alexander gave a faint smile, as if he understood. "I was sick for several days. I hated the medicine." Claire's eyes widened. "You poured it into a flower pot." "Once. 3 times." His smile grew. "Apparently your memory is improving." Claire covered her mouth as a laugh escaped. Then the rest returned in fragments. A pale young man sitting beside a window, dark hair falling across his forehead. A royal attendant arguing about bitter medicine. Claire, 10 years old and far too confident, telling him that bravery did not mean pretending nothing scared him. Her laughter faded. "It was you." Alexander nodded. "You tied half of your ribbon around my wrist because I told you I did not know how to be brave." Claire looked at his hand. "And I said you could borrow my courage. Until I found my own." His voice softened. "I never forgot." The night seemed to grow quieter around them. Claire touched her ribbon. "But why did you give me half of yours? You said courage should be returned when it was no longer needed." Alexander looked down at the fabric in his palm. "I told you I would come back someday and return yours too." Claire smiled through the sudden warmth behind her eyes. "You took 18 years. Royal scheduling is complicated." She laughed, and the emotion loosened enough for her to breathe again. Alexander held the ribbon toward her, but did not move closer. Claire took it carefully. The old fabric felt impossibly light for something carrying nearly 2 decades of memory. "Why did you not tell me immediately?" she asked. "Because I wanted to be certain." His eyes met hers. "And because I did not want a childhood kindness to become an obligation." Claire went still. Alexander continued. "Whatever exists between us now should belong to the people we are today, not to a promise made when you were 10. The tenderness of that answer reached her more deeply than the reveal itself. Claire folded the second ribbon into her palm. "For a king, you spend a surprising amount of time making sure people have choices. I am trying to improve the profession." She smiled. Then a faint warmth stirred somewhere deep inside her, subtle and unfamiliar, answering the quiet steadiness in his gaze. Alexander seemed to feel it too, because his breath paused. Neither named it. Not yet. Claire looked down at the 2 pieces of blue ribbon resting together in her hand. 18 years ago, she had given courage to someone who needed it. Now he had returned not because destiny demanded anything from her, but because he remembered the girl who had once seen a frightened young man before she ever saw a king. The next evening, Willow Creek Hall glowed with lantern light again, but Claire entered through the front door slowly, without a tray in her hands and without apologizing for taking her time. Her ankle was nearly healed, and she carried no walking stick tonight. Around her wrist, the 2 faded blue ribbons had been tied together into one simple band. Alexander noticed immediately. He was standing near the center of the hall speaking with several elders, but the moment his eyes found hers, The rest of the room seemed to lose importance. Claire almost smiled at that. The gathering was smaller than the moon gathering had been, more community than ceremony, yet nearly everyone who had watched her collapse days earlier was there. Martha stood near the healer tables. Jason had somehow convinced 3 teenagers to manage refreshments. Daniel was already holding 2 plates and claiming it was strategic. Claire had barely crossed the room when people began greeting her, not asking whether she could help, not handing her tasks, simply telling her they were glad she was there. That difference still felt strange. Good strange. Alexander approached only after she had finished speaking with Martha. "How does it feel?" he asked. Claire glanced down at her ankle. "Almost normal. I meant being here without carrying anything." She looked at him. Suspicious. "Progress." Before she could answer, Daniel stepped onto the small raised platform and tapped a spoon against a glass. "I have been informed that this is not my speech." Alexander gave him a flat look. "Correct. Tragic." Laughter moved through the hall as Daniel stepped aside. Alexander faced the pack, but when he spoke, his attention kept returning to Claire. He thanked the volunteers who had taken new shifts in the healer wing. He thanked Jason for reorganizing the work schedule. Then he said something Claire had not expected. Willow Creek has spent years receiving kindness from one person who rarely asked for anything in return. That is admirable. It is also a warning. The room quieted. Kindness should never become an excuse to stop noticing the person giving it. Claire felt her throat tighten. Alexander stepped down from the platform and walked toward her. She realized where he was going only when he stopped at the exact place where she had fallen during the moon gathering. Then the Alpha King lowered himself to one knee. A wave of silence moved through the hall. Claire stared at him. He held out the half of the old ribbon he had kept for 18 years, now resting beside hers where she had tied them together earlier. "You gave me courage once," he said softly. "Let me give something back." Claire could barely breathe. "What?" Alexander's gaze stayed steady. "The right to stop carrying everyone alone." Martha covered her mouth. Jason looked down. Even Daniel went quiet. Claire felt tears gather, not from sadness, but from the unbearable tenderness of being understood. Alexander did not ask her to belong to him. He did not speak of duty, destiny, or rank. He simply offered his hand. Claire looked at it for a long moment, then placed hers in his. Warmth moved through her palm, deeper than before, gentle and certain. Somewhere inside her, her wolf stirred with recognition. Alexander's expression changed too. He felt it. Claire smiled through her tears. "You know everyone is staring." "I noticed." "And Daniel is crying." From behind them came an offended voice. Dust from the chandeliers. Laughter broke through the hall, soft and relieved. Alexander rose, but did not release Claire's hand until she chose to keep holding his. That choice mattered more than anything. Around them, Willow Creek returned to laughter, food, and ordinary conversation. Claire looked at the joined blue ribbons on her wrist, and then at the man beside her. Once, she had believed love meant being useful enough to deserve a place. Now she understood something gentler. Real love did not ask her to disappear into everyone else's needs. It noticed when she was tired. It waited when she was afraid. It stayed when she had nothing to give. And for the first time, Claire allowed herself to believe that being cared for was not weakness. It was simply another way of being loved.